Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Ali and today we are talking about my February study recap. So guys, I can't really believe it myself, but apparently the month of February is already over. Like I was still getting over my January month when February was here, and then it has literally come and gone. I didn't understand anything that happened, and somehow we are already in March. Like I'm filming this video you're watching today on March 6th, so we're already well into March. I cannot believe it. It is insane. I think this year is going to go by so fast. Prepare yourselves. Anyway, February was a short but intense month, so let's go ahead and start on the recap because I have a lot to tell you today, guys. So this video will be divided in two parts. First, I'm going to talk about the things I faced this month, and then we'll go over my intentions for the month and whether or not I actually met my intentions. So for the first part, I'm going to do it a bit differently from the first video on this series where I did my January study recap. And this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down the month into weeks, just like I do with my weekly study list, and basically I will go over each of my study lists one by one and tell you what went on behind the scenes. I think it's a bit easier for you guys to follow, so if this format works for this video, I'm probably going to keep this format for the next videos in this series. So anyway, let's start with week 5. In week 5, I actually completed 100% of my weekly study goals. I'm gonna go over this week a bit faster because nothing much happened. Actually, for that week, I got on with my study plan as planned, and I just followed, whatever I wanted to study for that week, and I also followed the frequency of my study routine. I just got on with it. I didn't face much difficulty that week. But then a thing that I wanted to note for that week is just that I actually started 2 new resources. So I started first the Assimil exercise book called Les Bases in French. So this is an exercise book in French, so the source language is French, to practice writing Russian cursive, and so far so good. I really like this book, and so I basically started it on week 5 and then continued using it over the month of February. The second thing I did is I basically did my full audit of new resources. Whenever I start a new resource, I have a sort of audit phase, and so I did this for my new exercise book, this time for Mandarin Chinese, Hanzi, the simplified Chinese characters. So Kantaiji Doriru is a book meant for Japanese natives to help them differentiate between how the characters are written in Japanese and how they are actually transformed into simplified characters when used for Mandarin Chinese. Just to tell you a little bit about the background, the Japanese characters have been imported from China about 2,000 years ago, and so nowadays the Japanese language uses characters that are a bit more complicated because they are older than the ones used now in China, since they have been simplified in more recent years. And so the challenge for Japanese natives studying Chinese is that they need to know how the simplified Chinese characters were created, so the Hanzi were created from the older version, and in some cases the version that is used in Japanese language. As you can tell by my explanation, this is quite a complex topic. It's actually quite confusing as well. In some cases the characters really look exactly the same, except that they're not written in the same order of the strokes, for example. So this is quite complicated. It's gonna take me, I think, quite a while to master. But in any case, this new resource that I started, this exercise book, so far has been very helpful in that area. On week 5 I did my audit of that exercise book, and on week 6 I actually started using it. Let's move on to week 6 actually. On week 6, I also completed 100% of my weekly study goals. I was very happy there. Nothing much happened on week 6 either. I got on with my study plan. I can tell you that from that week, I really felt a big improvement in my Russian cursive, and I was really happy about it. So I wrote a lot that week. I practiced a lot of my Russian cursive, and I used for that the new exercise book, the new Assimil exercise book. I started using the week prior to that, and I also used my own document in Russian written in cursive on my iPad. I'm using these paragraphs to copy and transcribe myself onto my notebook, and I'm basically transcribing the same paragraphs over and over again. So far I've done it 3 times, so not a lot, but still you can see between these 3 different transcriptions how much I've improved. Those of you who can read Russian cursive probably see it a bit more, but definitely my handwriting in cursive improved, and so I'm very, very happy about it. In terms of routine, during week 6, I basically had 3 sessions of cursive writing practice, and from the week after, I started having 1 session per week, but it was still enough to maintain my level and improve it. Another thing I started doing on week 6 was actually to naturally do some shadowing. During my Russian listening immersion and my Chinese listening immersion, shadowing is something that I actually lacked during my years studying Japanese. I should have started shadowing much earlier, and it would have really helped me speak faster, I think, because it was actually a big point in my Japanese language learning journey. I started speaking quite late in comparison with my overall input level, so I was understanding a lot, but I couldn't speak for a long time. And so I think one of the reasons why that happened really was because I didn't speak at all in the language. And one of the practice that I could have implemented into my study routine was shadowing, which I didn't do at all. So I do not want to make the same mistake with Russian and Chinese, and so naturally I started doing some shadowing. So if you guys don't know what shadowing is, it's basically repeating what you hear. You know, you shadow the people you hear on the video, on the podcast, or whatever audio you're listening to. You can pause the audio if you want, but you don't have to. Shadowing is very flexible. You can basically do it however you want to. It's a natural way to acquire a language. It's also the way you acquired your own language when you were a baby and you started repeating what you heard people say around you. It's exactly the same idea, and that's why it is so useful in language learning. So I started doing it during week 6 for Russian and Chinese, and I was very happy to hear my own voice in these languages, so it gave me a lot of motivation. That is why I, from that week, started including it into my weekly study goals to do in combination with my listening practice, basically. Week 7 now. Week 7 was a bit more challenging, not gonna lie. So if you saw my last video, you would have seen that my husband and I actually adopted a cat. She's actually sleeping under the table right now where the camera is. I will show her to you. Let's just say that she was a disturbance in my life, in our lives, a very happy disturbance, don't get me wrong, but then of course it came with not sleeping very much at night, and even during the day she really wanted our attention a lot. So she was crying a lot, not only because she was adapting to us and it took a bit of time, it was also because it was before her surgery, her spaying surgery, so she was in heat, and so she was having a lot of symptoms of that, and of course she required more attention than usual. So all in all, it meant that I could not focus on my studying as much as usual, but that's completely normal, of course. I still managed to complete my goals for that week, and that was also because I knew it in advance. I knew that Kinako would come that week, so I adapted my goals to reflect that. I knew that I wouldn't have as much time as I just had had, for example, on week 6. So I adapted my goals and I made sure that this was not too much for me to go through. So that's also why I managed to complete my goals. One thing I want to mention for week 7 is that unfortunately, and even with the help of the new exercise book I got, the Kantai Jidoriru, I started confusing Chinese characters and Japanese characters. So you see, I actually had a very good idea getting that textbook because I definitely need that from now on. If you guys don't know, I have an advanced proficiency in Japanese, and historically I have learned Japanese before Chinese. I haven't been really introduced to Hanzi characters, so the simplified characters used in Mandarin Chinese, until much later in my study of ideograms in general. So that means that I am definitely more used to Japanese characters, or at least how the ideograms are used in the Japanese language. And it's almost, I read so much in Japanese, it's almost second nature to me. Ideograms don't feel foreign to me at all. They are, an integral part of my mind. But then it does mean that I have some automatisms. When I see ideograms, definitely connect a meaning to them automatically. So it's instant. But then when it comes to writing them myself, I notice that I now sometimes confuse some characters that are very similar from Mandarin Chinese to Japanese. So I can do, I alternate. Sometimes I confuse a Japanese character for a Chinese one, and sometimes I confuse a Chinese character for a Japanese one, especially when I'm writing. How did I notice that? It was when I was taking notes from my course on the NHK Newmon textbook, written in Japanese. So my notes are in Japanese because the textbook is in Japanese, and then I would of course have a lot of example sentences in Chinese to write at the same time. And I realized when reviewing my notes that I had actually done a few mistakes there in my characters. That's so bad. I really need to be careful here. So the way I am counter-attacking this situation is just by making sure I am as focused as possible when I do my study sessions for Mandarin Chinese when I need to write. But that's it for week 7, so let's go now to week 8. Week 8 was a respiration week for me. So what does that mean? Basically, a respiration week is a kind of semi-break week. I removed for a week any active studying from my weekly goals list. And I kept immersion practice and output practice. So speaking practice, writing practice. So basically what I left out were my exercise books and my textbooks for the most part. And this was because I felt at that point, so at the end of week 7, that I had assimilated a lot of things from all the studying I had been doing since basically week 2 of the year. So it has been 6 weeks in total without pause of me every single week using for each of my languages specific resources and assimilating a lot of grammar points, a lot of vocab, and especially for my new languages, Russian and Chinese. So I felt like I needed some time to digest and assimilate. And this happens sometimes to me, and I've done this as well in the past. I've had respiration weeks for years now when I was studying Japanese actively, but it had been a while. So I was happy to give myself one. It was a decision that I could make, so I made the decision. And this was a good idea. It was the right timing, as I suspected. So it was good for me to just, have fun with my languages and just for 1 week focus more on my immersion and my reading. I read a lot in Japanese. This really served me well, and I did assimilate a lot better what I had learned until that point. The week after that, on week 9, and that will be the last week we talk about in this video. It was right after my respiration week, and I felt that I then needed to review everything I had studied before that point. So week 9 was then a sort of review week. As I said, during my respiration week, I did not open my textbooks. So on week 9, what I did was, instead of, once again opening my textbooks and then going straight into these and just go through the next chapter chapter on the list, I would just go over all the chapters I had already covered and do a sort of recap of everything I had studied until that point. It really was the good time for me to do it after my respiration week. This kind of week really helps my brain make sense of it, of everything I had learned until that point, I had studied until that point, and just put it together, assimilate and just mush it together instead of having seen all of these rules one week after another and not make any connections between these. So this is how review weeks work for me and why they are so efficient. One thing I did during week 9 was to start studying with the Assimil textbook finally. So I told you earlier that I think it was on week 5. Yes, so at the very beginning of February, I started using the cursive exercise book for Russian, which is from the same collection, but this is an exercise book. And this was because I wanted to focus on my cursive writing practice. But then I was eagerly waiting for the right moment to start the main textbook from that collection, the Assimil textbook from beginner level to B2 level in Russian, still in French language. And so basically, the Assimil method is a very known method in Europe, and I have seen this language learning method for years everywhere in bookstores, and also, I heard about this method at school even, and at university as well. So I knew that this was very well known, and that apparently it worked very well because every user I had the pleasure of meeting told me that these were very good language learning methods. So for years, I had been eagerly waiting for the right moment to use one of these textbooks myself. Finally, the moment came, and I purchased it in January for Russian. So I purchased it from France, and I basically had them shipped over to Japan. So I did it once. I got 3 books at the same time. It was very expensive, but I do not regret it at all. The main textbook I wanted to start during a week when I really had the leeway to properly check how the method was working. The Assimil method is quite intense. You have to study every day for 30 minutes and you can't really have breaks. You have to have 7 days in front of you because you have 7 days of studying in a row planned in the textbook. Like every chapter is 7 days. I do believe that this method works. This is very regular and also not too much at the same time, and it really, builds upon your prior knowledge in a very adapted way, and also it's very pedagogical. So I took the time to really read everything about the method. So at the beginning of the textbook there is a whole explanation section about what the method is about, how it works, how you need to approach the textbook. So I took the time to read all of that, really assimilate, understand how it worked, and then I started for myself. So I did the first chapter. This was great. All in all, I'm very happy I have the Assimil textbook now. I'm going to properly learn Russian finally, especially grammar rules that definitely I did not understand via Duolingo, and I was a bit scared for a while that I would learn wrong things from Duolingo because it is so lacking in explanations, and especially about grammar, especially in a language like Russian where grammar is very important, very complicated. I was very happy to finally learn the proper rules of Russian grammar with the Assimil textbook, which start from chapter 1, lesson 1. So I was, it was very quick. We will talk about Duolingo in a future video. All in all, I'm very happy I have the Assimil textbook now. I'm gonna properly learn Russian finally. So that will be it for the week by week recap of the month of February. Now let's go to my intentions and how I did with them. I had 3 intentions for the month of February, so here we go. The first intention I had was to not force myself to study any language. I was coming from the month of January, of course, when I felt sometimes a bit frustrated having to focus on Chinese during a particular week because I had study goals left for Chinese when I actually wanted to spend more time with Russian. So basically, without going into too much details, this intention meant that I would allow myself to not meet all of my goals in one particular language for one particular week if I wanted to focus on another language instead. It didn't end up happening, but I gave myself the possibility, the option, the leeway to do it. I allowed myself to do it. I didn't force myself to study Chinese in February at all. I had as much fun studying Chinese as I had studying Russian and of course Japanese. But definitely I'm having a lot of fun now with Chinese as well. I had an aha moment at the beginning of February with my Chinese textbook, the NHK Yume textbook, when it finally got interesting because I finally got around to see the chapters that are a bit more complex, finally made me understand more of the language, so I'm having so much fun now with the language. So this intention was met and I was very happy about it. My second intention was to prioritize fun and output in my languages, which I did as well. So during my respiration week and my review week especially, I, as I said, did a lot of shadowing, so semi-output practice in all my languages. I tested AI chats, for example, during these 2 weeks in Chinese, in Japanese, and I tried in Russian, but it was still too hard, so I couldn't do it. But in Japanese and Chinese, that was actually quite useful, and if you guys are interested, I can make a video about this. But yeah, that's a new fun way to spend time with my languages. Another way I had a lot of fun was looking for new immersion resources for Chinese and Russian. For Russian, it was a no-brainer because I had actually not enough resources, and I only had the Easy Russian podcast and YouTube channel to go on. I didn't have anything else almost. And in February, I finally found, so for example, a few movies on Netflix in Russian. I even watched one of them, Major Grom, like a Russian superhero movie. And it was so interesting, so well made. I had never heard of this. I also found a few YouTube channels in Russian. In Chinese, I started watching again the vlogs by Vicky Soups. She lives in the US with her husband and her daughter, and they're all very cute. I love their vlogs. They have subtitles in Chinese, but still subtitles for me to follow along. So I loved watching these vlogs during the month of February. My third intention for February was to use my study resources a bit more intelligently, a bit more smartly. Let's say. What I meant by that was to basically put more thoughts into how I would approach some study resources, especially the linear study resources. This kind of textbook I find hard to sometimes, take a step back from and have a higher perspective on. And so that's what I meant by this intention, because I wanted to force myself a little bit more to take a step back on some of these resources and understand what I was feeling towards the resources, whether I wanted to review them from the start, whether I had properly assimilated what they had been teaching me for a few weeks, whether I liked the format, whether I wanted to change the format and, use the resource in a different way than in a linear way as the textbook was prompting me to do. You get my point. Taking a step back, assessing what I felt towards the resource, and maybe use it a bit more smartly. If it's not clear, let me know in the comments. I will explain a bit better. The textbook I did it for was the Kantai-ji exercise book. I created myself more exercises out of this exercise book because I need more exercises than what the exercise book is giving me, mainly because I am not a Japanese native speaker, so I need more exercises and in a bit different way. So I did manage to study with this intention in mind during the month of February. Okay, so guys, that will be it for today. Let me know in the comments how your month of February went. It was very short, right? I think we can all agree on that. Short but intense, just like I said at the beginning of this video. I hope you enjoyed today's monthly recap. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that this video was interesting for you. And I will see you very soon in my next video. Bye bye! Mata ne!